The cockpit was chaos. Alarms blaring, controls unresponsive, the plane plummeting toward the earth. He had always believed in control, in training, in his ability to handle any crisis. But as the ground rushed closer, a terrifying realization gripped him. This was the end. Then, everything went black. But death wasn't the end. He awoke outside his body, staring at the wreckage, and then the light came. What he saw beyond changed everything, and he had to tell the world.
Flying wasn't just my job, it was who I was. For over 2 decades, I had spent more time in the cockpit than anywhere else. The feel of the controls beneath my hands, the hum of the engines, the steady rhythm of checklists, it was all second nature to me. I had logged thousands of flight hours, crossed countless skies, and faced everything from severe turbulence to unexpected mechanical failures. And through it all, I had always been in control. Piloting demanded precision, discipline, and a level head, and I had built my entire career on those principles. There was no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. Every maneuver, every procedure was drilled into my mind until reaction became instinct. That was the way I had been trained, and it was the way I had lived. The idea of an uncontrollable situation? It was unthinkable. Even as a boy, I had dreamed of flying. While other kids were fascinated by superheroes or astronauts, my eyes were always on the sky. I spent hours at the airport with my father, watching planes take off and land, mesmerized by their power and grace. By the time I earned my pilot's license, it wasn't just a profession, it was my identity. I wasn't meant to be on the ground. The sky was home. And I was good at it. No, I was great at it. I had earned the respect of my colleagues, the trust of my passengers, and the confidence of my superiors. I had handled emergencies with the calm precision expected of a pilot. I had navigated through violent storms, diverted flights safely during mechanical malfunctions, and made split-second decisions that saved lives. There wasn't a challenge I couldn't handle. That morning was no different. It was a short-haul flight, a route I had flown more times than I could count. The kind of flight I could do in my sleep. No complications, no unexpected variables. A standard pre-flight briefing, a well-maintained aircraft, and a clear weather forecast. The sky was a deep, unbroken blue, visibility was perfect, and the wind was mild. If there were ever a textbook example of an easy flight, this was it. As I entered the cockpit, I settled into my seat, feeling the familiar leather beneath me. The instrument panel glowed softly, the screens displaying their usual numbers, readings, and settings. The comforting hum of the aircraft systems coming online filled the space around me. My co-pilot, a younger but competent pilot named Ryan, ran through the initial checklist with me. His voice was steady, professional, mirroring the ease of the situation. Fuel levels checked. Check. Hydraulics are good. Roger that. The routine continued, each call-out reinforcing the sense of normalcy. The pre-flight checks were my ritual, a methodical process that ensured everything was in order. It was part of what made flying so safe. Pilots didn't just rely on skill, we relied on systems, redundancies, and procedures designed to eliminate risk. That's why I never worried. There was always a plan. By the time we received clearance to taxi, I was fully in my element. The engines rumbled as we eased toward the runway, the weight of the aircraft barely noticeable against the power beneath us. The tower gave us the go-ahead, and I pushed the throttles forward, feeling the acceleration press me into my seat. Takeoff was smooth, the aircraft responding just as it should. We climbed steadily, the city shrinking beneath us, the landscape turning into a patchwork of roads and fields. Soon we were above the clouds, cruising at altitude, the sky stretching endlessly ahead. This was my world. I glanced at the instrument panel, scanning the readings out of habit. Airspeed steady. Altitude level. No anomalies. Everything was routine. Leaning back slightly, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. Over the years, I had faced enough close calls to know that nothing in aviation should ever be taken for granted. But deep down, I had always believed that if I followed procedure, if I maintained control, Nothing could truly go wrong. I had seen pilots break under pressure. I had witnessed fear take hold in moments of crisis. But not me. I had been trained for every possibility. There was no scenario I hadn't prepared for, no failure I couldn't troubleshoot. I thought I had seen it all. I thought I had control. I was wrong. So very wrong. Cruising at altitude, everything remained routine. The skies stretched endlessly ahead, an expanse of blue so vast it felt infinite. Below, scattered clouds drifted lazily, their cotton-like forms breaking the monotony of the Earth's surface. I glanced at the instrument panel. Everything was steady: airspeed, altitude, engine performance, all well within normal parameters. Ryan and I exchanged a few words, our voices relaxed but professional. "It's a good day to fly," he remarked, stretching slightly in his seat. "Yeah," I agreed, checking the fuel levels. "One of those flights where you almost feel bad for getting paid." We both chuckled. Then, the first flicker. It was subtle, barely noticeable, just a quick red flash on one of the panels before vanishing. I frowned, leaning forward. Did I really see that? I tapped the screen, but the reading returned to normal. A glitch, maybe? Nothing major. Still, something gnawed at the back of my mind. I had learned early in my career to trust my instincts. Machines, no matter how advanced, could fail. That's why we relied on checklists, redundancies, backups. We were always prepared. Before I could say anything, another alert appeared. This time it stayed. Ryan sat up straighter. "That's odd," he muttered, his fingers already moving over the controls. A second later, another alert, this time from a completely different system. Then another. The cockpit, which had been so calm just moments ago, was now alive with flashing lights and alarms. Fuel pressure fluctuating. Electrical instability detected. Autopilot disengaged. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, scanning the cascading failures. Ryan's voice was tight but controlled. "Hydraulics are failing. We're losing stability." I took a breath, forcing my hands to remain steady. "Stay calm. Follow procedure." We had drilled for this. System failures happened. That's why we had protocols, backup generators, and redundancies in place. I reached for the emergency checklist, flipping switches to isolate the issue. Then the aircraft shuddered. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't something we could just ride out. This was deeper, more violent. The plane tilted sharply, a sickening lurch that sent a jolt through my seat. Ryan cursed, gripping the controls. "We're losing altitude." I checked the altimeter. We were dropping fast. I tightened my grip on the yoke, trying to stabilize. But the controls were sluggish. Heavy. Unresponsive. Panic flared in my chest, but I shoved it down. Focus. Stay in control. I toggled the manual override, trying to reroute power. Nothing. "Flight control, this is Flight 217. My voice was steady as I keyed the radio, but inside, an icy dread was forming. "We are experiencing critical system failure. Requesting immediate emergency landing." A crackled response came through. "Flight 217, say again?" Ryan turned to me, his face pale. "We've lost primary power." The plane lurched again, tilting hard to the left. The alarms were screaming now, a deafening chorus of chaos. My mind raced. What is causing this? This wasn't a normal failure. This was catastrophic. I grabbed the radio again. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 217, we have lost." Then, everything went dark. The cockpit plunged into silence. The steady hum of the engines. Gone. The glow of the navigation panels. Gone. The reassuring buzz of instruments. Gone. For the first time in my life, I was flying blind. The emergency system stuttered back to life a second later, but it was too late. The altimeter was spinning downward. We were falling. Ryan's voice broke through the chaos. "We're in a full stall." I fought the yoke, tried to angle the nose up, but it was like wrestling a dead machine. No lift. No control. The ground, once distant, rushed toward us. Something inside me cracked. For years, I had trusted in my training, my discipline, my control. I had believed that there was always a way out, that there was always an answer. But this? There was no fixing this. We weren't going to make it. I had never felt helpless in the cockpit before. Not once. Until now. Ryan was shouting something, his hands moving frantically over the controls. I didn't hear him. My eyes locked on the horizon, which was tilting at an unnatural angle. I thought of my family. I thought of all the times I had walked off a plane, knowing I had landed safely. I thought of how, just minutes ago, I had been so sure of my control. The sickening feeling of weightlessness hit me. Impact was inevitable. The alarms blurred into the background, swallowed by the terrifying silence of what was coming. I wanted to fight. I wanted to fix it. But there was nothing left to fix. The ground raced toward us at impossible speed. My last conscious thought was not of fear, but of failure. Then everything went black. There was no pain, no sound, no weight. I was simply there. At first, I thought I was dreaming, disoriented, floating in a space that felt neither real nor imagined. But then, as my vision sharpened, I saw the wreckage. The plane was a twisted mass of metal, torn apart upon impact. Fires burned in pockets along the broken fuselage, black smoke curling into the sky like grasping fingers. Shattered wings, crumpled landing gear, jagged debris. It was unrecognizable. Emergency responders swarmed the site, moving with urgency. Their voices were muffled, distant, like sound was being filtered through layers of water. Then I saw my body. It was twisted, broken, motionless. Something inside me should have panicked at the sight. Should have recoiled at the unnatural angles, the blood staining my torn uniform. But I felt nothing. No fear. No pain. Just a strange, eerie calm. I wasn't inside that body anymore. I hovered above the scene, detached, observing it with a surreal clarity. I could see everything, the frantic movements of the paramedics, the flashing lights of the ambulances, the fire crews dousing the wreckage. Yet none of it touched me. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't feeling the heat of the flames or the sting of shattered glass. I wasn't there, not in the way I once was. Then I felt it. A pull. It wasn't physical, no hands grasping, no force dragging me. But something was calling me away from the wreckage, from the scene of my own death. At first I resisted. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that whatever tether had once held me to my body was gone. I was being drawn towards something greater. The world around me blurred, stretched, faded. Then, suddenly, light. Not the harsh, artificial glow of emergency lights. Not the blinding, white-hot flash of an explosion. This was different. Living light. It surrounded me, filled me, became me. It was not just something I could see, I could feel it. It was warm but not hot. Powerful but not overwhelming. It carried a peace so pure, so absolute that it defied explanation. I was moving, yet I had no sense of direction. I had no body, no form, and yet I existed more completely than I ever had before. Then I saw it, a tunnel, stretching into infinity. It wasn't made of stone or clouds or any material I recognized. It was made of light itself. It pulsed with an indescribable energy, its radiance far beyond earthly comprehension. I felt a presence near me. Not just near, within. Around. Everywhere. And then, in an instant I knew. I was not alone. A figure emerged from the light. At first, it was impossible to discern details. Too bright, too immense, too beyond what my human mind could process. But as I focused, the radiance softened just enough. I saw him. I knew who he was before he spoke. His presence was overpowering, not in fear, but in absolute love. Every part of me recognized him. Not because I had seen him before, but because it was as if I had always known him. Jesus. His eyes met mine, and for the first time since the crash, something stirred deep within me. Not fear. Not confusion. Just truth. I had never been a deeply religious man. Sure, I had believed in something. A higher power, a force beyond human understanding. But I had never committed. Never really thought about what came next. Yet, standing in front of him now, I knew, without question, without hesitation, that he was real. That he had always been real. Your time is not yet over. His voice wasn't sound in the way we hear on earth. It resonated through me, into me, filling every part of my being. I wanted to speak, to respond, to ask a million questions. But before I could, the light around us shifted. And suddenly, I was no longer standing in front of him. Instead, I was watching something that felt both familiar and foreign. My life. I saw myself as a child, staring up at the sky with wonder, dreaming of the day I would fly. I saw my mother standing nearby, smiling at me, but now, for the first time, I saw the worry in her eyes. A silent prayer for my safety, one I had never noticed before. Then, I was a teenager, sitting on my bed, head in my hands, after failing my first flight exam. I had been so sure I wasn't good enough. That I had failed permanently. But now, I saw what I couldn't back then. Jesus had been there. Not visibly. Not physically. But his presence had surrounded me, waiting for me to look up, to reach out. Scene after scene unfolded. Moments of kindness I had barely remembered, words spoken in passing, encouragement given to a struggling colleague, rippling outwards, changing lives in ways I had never seen. And then, the moments I wished I could take back. Times when I had chosen pride over humility, selfishness over compassion, control over surrender. Times when I had let my fear of failure keep me from stepping into something greater. I watched as I ignored opportunities to help, to heal, to love. I had spent my life believing that success, control, precision were what mattered. That my greatest purpose was to be the best at what I did. But now, I saw the truth. I had been blind. My purpose had never been about flying planes, logging hours, or advancing my career. It had always been about people. About the lives I touched, the moments I had overlooked, the love I had failed to fully embrace. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming realization of it all. Then, the vision faded. I was back in the presence of Jesus. His gaze was steady, filled with love so deep it undid me. You were made for more than this. The words cut through me, gentle yet undeniable. For the first time in my life, I understood. Everything I had ever done, every choice I had ever made, it all mattered. And now, I had a choice to make. Would I embrace my true purpose? Or would I let it slip away? The weight of Jesus' words pressed into me like an unseen force, filling every part of my being. You were made for more than this. I stood in the presence of the Almighty, stripped of everything I once thought defined me, my career, my achievements, my ability to control every outcome. None of it mattered now. I had seen the truth. I had seen how every moment, every word, every action carried a ripple effect beyond what I had ever imagined. And now, I had a choice. Jesus lifted his hand, and the space around us shifted. The radiant light that had surrounded us pulsed, shimmering like water rippling outward. Then, as if I had stepped outside of time itself, I saw the first path. At first, I didn't recognize the man I was watching. He stood before a crowd, speaking. Not from a podium, not as a lecturer, but as a man sharing a truth that burned within him. His voice was steady, filled with conviction, with passion. Then I realized. It was me. I watched as I told my story, as I spoke of what I had seen, of the love that had surrounded me in Jesus' presence. I saw faces in the crowd change, some skeptical, some confused, but others were leaning in, eyes widening, hearts opening. I saw a man in the audience, middle-aged, weary, on the verge of giving up. Tears filled his eyes as he listened. Later, he would come up to me, desperation in his voice as he asked, "How do I find him?" And because I spoke, because I shared what I had seen, he did find him. The vision shifted. I was speaking at a small gathering, maybe a church, maybe just a group of friends. A woman sat in the back, arms crossed, doubt etched into her face. She had spent years convinced that God had abandoned her. But something in my words stirred something deep within her, something she had buried long ago. I watched as, days later, she prayed for the first time in decades. The ripples spread further. A young boy sat in a room, listening to my story on a screen. He didn't understand everything, but something took root in him that day. Years later, he would become a man who would lead others to faith, who would step into his calling with confidence, all because he had heard my words. Then, another vision, one I couldn't ignore. I saw a man standing alone, staring at the edge of a bridge. The weight of his life had become unbearable. He had already decided, this was it. But before he took the final step, his phone buzzed. A notification. A video. My story? I saw him pause. I saw him listen. I saw his tears fall. And I saw him step back from the ledge. All because I had spoken. The vision pulled back, and I saw it all at once, the ripple effect of a single choice. People I would never meet. Lives I would never know. All changed because I said yes to my mission. This is what happens when you share the truth, Jesus said, his voice steady. This is what happens when you step into what you were created for. Tears burned in my eyes. I wanted this. But then, the light dimmed, and a new vision formed. At first, it looked the same. I woke up. I healed. Life moved forward. But something was different. I saw myself in my hospital bed, looking at my family. The same knowing filled me, the same fire burned inside me. But this time, I said nothing. I convinced myself it was just a dream. That my mind had been playing tricks on me. That speaking about it would cost me too much. My career, my relationships, my reputation. I told myself it was easier to stay silent. And so I did. I returned to flying. My life resumed its old rhythm. The days passed, then weeks, then years. And yet, something was missing. I saw myself sitting alone in my home, staring at a television screen but not really watching. The emptiness in my eyes was unmistakable. Then I saw them. The people who had been in my first vision. The man in the audience, the one whose life had been changed, wasn't there this time. He never heard my story. His pain continued. The woman in the back of the church? She walked away, still believing God had abandoned her. The boy? He never grew into the leader he was meant to be. And the man on the bridge? This time, his phone never buzzed. This time, he took the step. I felt sick. The vision blurred, and suddenly, I was back in the light, back in the presence of Jesus. The weight of the choice pressed down on me. My voice trembled. What if I fail? His gaze was steady. The only way you fail is if you stay silent. The light around me pulsed. I had to choose. Comfort or calling. Safety or purpose. A life of control or a life of faith. My soul knew the answer before my mind did. I took a breath. I'll do it. Suddenly, I felt something pulling me, hard. The warmth of the presence around me began to fade. The weightlessness I had felt in this place was disappearing, replaced by something heavier, something tangible. I was being pulled back. No, wait! I tried to reach for him, for the light, for the overwhelming love that had surrounded me. But it was too late. A rush of sound, weight, pain. And then I gasped. The air punched into my lungs like fire. A deep, aching pressure filled my chest. The world around me was blindingly bright, but not from heavenly light, from harsh hospital fluorescence. Voices. Beeping. Movement. Someone grabbed my arm. He's awake! The weight of my body crashed down on me, the pain, the exhaustion, the sheer density of existence. But through all of it, one thought burned in my mind. I had been sent back. And I could not stay silent. I gasped, my chest heaving as air tore through my lungs. Pain. Heavy, crushing pain. Everything was too loud, too bright. My senses, dulled by whatever space I had just been in, now flooded back with a brutal intensity. "He's awake!" someone shouted. The room snapped into focus. White walls, beeping monitors, blurry figures hovering over me. A doctor leaned over, shining a light into my eyes. His expression was a mix of shock and disbelief. This isn't possible," he muttered. My mother sobbed beside me, clutching my arm like she was afraid I'd slip away again. My father stood over her, his usual reserved demeanor shattered, eyes red-rimmed and wet. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my body sluggish, like I had been dragged back from somewhere far beyond this world. The doctors ran tests. They spoke in hushed tones, whispering things I wasn't meant to hear. He was clinically dead for nearly 10 minutes. No oxygen to the brain. He shouldn't be waking up, let alone functioning. It's unexplainable. But I knew. I knew why I was back. The recovery that followed was even stranger. My injuries, ones that should have taken months to heal, improved at a pace that left the medical staff baffled. Within days, I was sitting up. Within a week, I was walking. "You're a miracle," a nurse told me in awe. I nodded but said nothing. Because how could I explain? At first, I stayed silent, afraid to put words to what I had seen. I told myself it was too much, too impossible, that no one would believe me. And I was right. The first time I told my family, their faces fell into stunned silence. "I saw him," I whispered, my voice still hoarse from the trauma my body had endured. "I was dead, but I met Jesus." My father stiffened. "Son," he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You've been through a lot. The brain plays tricks when it's deprived of oxygen." My mother frowned, concern tightening her features. "Maybe it was just a dream," she offered gently. But it wasn't. I remembered every second of it. The tunnel, the overwhelming love, the life review. The choice. I knew it was real. But they didn't. And the more I talked, the more their skepticism grew. Friends visited, colleagues called, but the moment I shared my experience, I could feel the shift. The awkward pauses. The side glances. The forced smiles. Some laughed it off. Some changed the subject. Others just stopped calling altogether. Even at work, the whispers started. "He was always level-headed, but now, maybe the crash messed with his mind." I wouldn't want to fly with him again. I was no longer seen as the rational, disciplined pilot I had built my entire identity around. I was the crazy one now. And yet, despite all of it, the doubts, the ridicule, the quiet unraveling of the life I once knew, I could not stay silent. Because I had been sent back for a reason. And I would not waste this second chance. At first, I didn't know where to start. I had returned to a world that no longer felt like home. The days stretched ahead of me, filled with the echoes of conversations that fell on deaf ears. My career was slipping away. My friendships had thinned. Even my own family looked at me like a stranger. But I couldn't ignore what I had seen. I had met Jesus. I had stood in the presence of the Almighty, felt a love so pure, so overwhelming, that it changed everything inside me. I had been given a choice, and I had chosen to return. Not for myself, but for the mission. And so, I began to speak. At first, it was just to the people who would listen, a small group at church, a few friends who hadn't yet turned away. I shared what had happened, the truth of my experience, and the weight of the decision I had made. Some nodded politely but clearly didn't believe me. Others dismissed it as a hallucination, a trick of the dying brain. A few listened. And those few? They were enough. Because something inside them shifted when I spoke. Some had been searching for something more their entire lives, waiting for a sign, for proof that life wasn't just an endless cycle of meaningless days. For them, my story was that sign. One conversation led to another. Someone invited me to speak at a small recovery group for people struggling with loss. Then a church asked me to share my testimony. Then a pastor reached out, wanting to hear my experience firsthand. And little by little, the message began to spread. I will never forget the first man who came up to me after I spoke. He was in his late 50s, his hands rough and calloused, his eyes tired but wide with something I couldn't quite place. He waited until everyone else had left before approaching me, his voice shaking. "What you said? I think..." He swallowed, eyes darting away. "I think I've been running from God my whole life." His words struck me deep. "I spent years trying to ignore him," he continued. "But hearing you talk about Jesus like that, I don't know, it's like something in me woke up." I put a hand on his shoulder. "He's been waiting for you," I said. "He never left." Tears filled his eyes. Right there, in that small church, he prayed for the first time in decades. That was the moment I truly understood. It wasn't about how many people rejected me. It wasn't about the ones who walked away, laughed, or whispered behind my back. It was about the ones who stayed. The ones who listened. The ones whose hearts were searching for something more. If even one soul turned toward Jesus because of my story, wasn't that enough? As I continued sharing my experience, I met others who had been to the edge of life and returned. People from different walks of life, different backgrounds, some religious, some not at all, yet each with a story eerily similar to mine. They had seen the tunnel of light. They had felt the overwhelming presence of love. Some had heard Jesus speak their names, just as he had spoken mine. And like me, they had struggled to be believed. The world had told them to forget, to move on, to explain it away. But we all knew the truth. And together, we encouraged each other to keep speaking. To keep telling people what we had seen. Because we had been sent back for a reason. Not everyone welcomed my story. Some outright rejected it. Some tried to argue with me, saying it was nothing more than a dying brain firing off memories. Others dismissed me with polite nods, eager to change the subject. I lost more friends. My old life, the one I had carefully built over decades, was gone. But I was no longer afraid of losing it. Because the more I spoke, the more I understood, this mission was never about approval. It was about truth. I had been given a second chance, not to live for myself, but to bring others closer to Jesus. And that truth was worth any loss. I don't believe you're hearing this by accident. Maybe you've felt it, that tug, that ache inside you that whispers there must be more than this. Maybe you've spent your life searching, through success, through relationships, through distraction, only to find that nothing truly fills the void. I'm here to tell you, there is more. I have seen it. I have stood in the presence of Jesus himself, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, he is real. His love is unlike anything on this earth. It is pure, consuming, endless. It doesn't waver based on your mistakes or your doubts. It has always been waiting for you. Your life matters. Every moment has meaning. Every choice creates ripples beyond what you can see. And one day, whether sooner or later, you will stand before him, too. The question is, will you be ready? Will you spend your days ignoring the truth, pushing it aside, convincing yourself that this life is all there is? Or will you seek him? Will you open your heart to the one who has been waiting for you since the beginning? Because I promise you, on the other side of that step, there is a love so overwhelming, so powerful, that you will never be the same again. I should not be here. I should have died in that crash. But Jesus sent me back so I could tell you this. And now, the choice is yours. What will you do with it?